The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being with us for this special Daniel Code webinar today. How's our volume, folks? I see Norbert here. He's usually first in. Can you all hear me all right? Yes, thank you, Norbert. You're on the ball, son. Fantastic. But, excuse me. Well, it's great to have you with us, and I should also say good morning to our friends down under, and good afternoon to our friends across the Tasman Sea. Great to have you here. And we've got a pretty controversial webinar today, which I hope you'll enjoy. So Andrew's with us, and Sim is with us. Good to have you with us, Sim. Maybe Peck Sim's with us as well. Chase, my nemesis who got me to stop smoking, is with us. Chun, up in Kuala Lumpur, thank you very much for being with us. And Joel says, sounds good from Vero Beach in Florida. That's a long way to go. Jada Pinkett Smith, lovely. Yes, okay. Excuse me. And Dean, of course, he's a demon trader. Good to have you with us, my friend. Lots of the regulars here. George is with us. Greg over in California, I spoke to Greg. He's a wealth fund manager in California, long-time client of the Daniel Code. We've had him with us for a long time. Hank down in the Hunter Valley, grandfather of the year, with his son, Justin, having a baby. Well done. His wife, rather, I should say. Jada Pinkett Smith, always lovely to have ladies with us. We don't have many. We like to have as many as we can. Always have to greet them. Justin's now with us. Katarina's with us down in Sydney. It's cold and wet and maybe rainy. And that's great. Mike's with us. Murph is with us, of course. Norbert up in Canada, Peter Mack, the demon short-term trader. Randy, there's a voice from the past. Randy Hinderegger has been with us, gosh, must be one of the longest-serving members of the Daniel Code, and I've caught up with Randy in the States when I've done tutorials there many years ago. Lovely to have you with us, Randy. I hope you're in great health, my friend. Scott's with us. He's in the process of doing a tutorial at the moment. Sue up in Cairns, she's my star trader. She's a very, very good trader and did a Daniel Code tutorial and has really enjoyed it so much. Okay, Scott's in Michigan. I've been talking to my American friends. You see, I spent 18 months in America. I lived there when I was a young man down in New Orleans, but I got to travel around a lot of the country. And of course, almost all our clients are either in the US or Canada. I speak to the clients occasionally, and Scott's right in Michigan, and I said to him, what's happening? What's all the drama about? I mean, I've always considered Americans to be, certainly the ones I've met, very level-headed, very pragmatic people, very get-on-with-it people. And Scott was telling me he lives about 2 blocks from where all the drama was going on there. Wow, amazing stuff, isn't it? And we're going to touch on some of that as we move along. So a lot to talk about today, so let's move along. Those of you, let me see, make sure I've done everything I'm supposed to do. Yes, I have. This is great. The Daniel Code, as you know, is a series of proprietary ratios. They control time and price in all markets. And we're going to see a whole lot of that today because we certainly live in interesting times. And Sim and Peck Sim's with us. Good. Hello, Peck Sim. Lovely to have you with us too. And of course, if you haven't been following the tragicomedy that's going on in London at the High Court, this is Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. And if you haven't been following it, I mean, it's an amazing story, and it's certainly been terribly interesting. So what's going on is that Johnny and Amber were married for a few years, I gather, and all sorts of skullduggery going on, eventually, after they were divorced, Amber went and gave an interview to the Sun newspaper in England that said basically Johnny was a wife beater. So Depp's now very offended by that. He's the plaintiff in this action, and Heard is the principal witness for the Sun newspaper, who are trying to rely on a defence of truth. She certainly alleged that Depp beat her and abused her. So before the trial, the media were all on Heard's side, with Depp cast as a drunken druggie. And for the first 2 or 3 days, this is now in either day 9 or day 10, I think, before the trial, the media were all on Heard's side, and Depp was cast as a drunk and a druggie and generally a very bad character. And the evidence that's came out in the first 2 or 3 days supports all of that. So Depp put his hand up to that, but he's obviously running the argument that he may be a heavy drinker, and he may be a heavy user of drugs, but he's not a wife beater. And extraordinary things happened. That at the start of the case, the evidence against Depp just looked dire, looked horrible, mainly from the media. And as it's gone on, maybe I've jumped too soon, as it's gone on, as the trial has progressed, that narrative is changing very dramatically, with allegations that Miss Heard was having an affair with Elon Musk, amongst others, all sorts of things. And that trial, that narrative is changing. And it's not so obvious now who's the villain in this. If you've been reading, if you've been following what's been going on with it, you'll understand. But the point I'm trying to make is, goodness sakes, can we ever learn to see both sides of the argument before we jump to conclusions? And what's going on in the States in particular is extraordinary, and it goes from relatively minor issues, like one of the senior editors at New York Times resigned 2 days ago, said that Twitter had become the ultimate editor of whatever was on the New York Times, that it no longer valued free speech and argument. It was all a question of conforming to political PE, and she resigned. Well, that's sort of a minor thing. What's been happening in some of these cities with these Black Lives Matter protests, I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, America is a country founded on the rule of law, and there seems to be a significant part of the community that just don't accept that. But what I want to talk to you about today on that same sort of basis is that whether religious belief in part or all of the Bible is compatible with today's emphasis, indeed insistence on an adoption of the scientific method, but to the exclusion of all other views. Now, institutions at all levels of community and government, they're all on the same page. Science is king. You can give an argument that Trump is trying to present his credentials to the Christian right, but the institutions are all in the same boat. Political correctness is king. We were startled by that years ago, and it's just got worse and worse, more and more. And there's an almost universal view, not only in America, in my country as well, Australia, New Zealand, religion is something to be totally ignored or indeed despised. And most of the Western world actually lives in a religious veneer. I mean, you have "In God We Trust" on US banknotes. Most Western world courts require you to take, if you're giving evidence, take an oath, either on the Bible or an equivalent holy book, if there is such a thing. But people are offended by everything, aren't they? And these our moral values as Western society are still set by the Ten Commandments, which we first saw in the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. And but displays of the Ten Commandments has been fertile ground for litigation in the US. Every time somebody tries to put up a monument and inscribe the Ten Commandments, off to the courts. Those moral principles, they've been the principles of Western civilization for a very, very long time. In fact, the moral principles of the commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, all of those became the law of the early chancery courts in Britain. A lot of that, of course, was adopted in the US, and it's in the same legal system in Australia, New Zealand, and other Western countries. So a lot of those sort of principles are enshrined in the law today. But I want to take you to a story that I encountered some years ago. You can see I've done this late at night. Back in the early 200s, well, it wasn't the 200s, I apologize, it was the 2000s. This was sort of leading up to and just after the dot-com crash in 2000. I had a very good client. He was an old man, an old gentleman, and he was an extremely wealthy guy. He was a cattle farmer, big properties in northern Queensland. They're measured in square miles, not acres. This was a generational thing. His father and his grandfather had pioneered a lot of these vast cattle properties, and very wealthy people. C was retired from the farm, and one of his sons was running it. And another one of his sons was a director or a partner, perhaps in Merrill Lynch, as they were then. And CE was a dedicated, terribly interested trader. And I'd taught him what was the forerunner of the GMAG system. Some of you who came to my tutorials, I know some of you are still with us, in the States, well, a number of years ago now, will have met Bernard and his partner. And some of you, including Bernard, of course, are still trading the GMAD system with terrific results. But the forerunner of that was what I taught CE and what he was trading. And he would knock off his 110, 140% every year, year in, year out. A bad year for him was 80%. His son, well, the son that was a broker at Merrill Lynch, he managed the family money. The big money was handled by him. And, he did, you've heard my normal comments about managed funds. He's made 3, 4, 5, maybe 6% in a good year, and lost money in a bad year. CE never made less than 80%. Logically, he would talk to his son and say, look, this is what I've done this year, last year, the year before. I'm making 80%, 100%, 120%. Yeah, you're making virtually nothing, very little on the family funds. Would you have a look at the Daniel Code and see if you can learn something from it? And CE's son, of course, was scathing. And he said to CE, Dad, it's from the Bible, so it's got to be rubbish. He wouldn't even look at it. He wouldn't even try to learn. And that's an attitude that has proliferated, not just in trading, but in everything. The people's belief systems are so deeply entrenched that they've stopped the old traditional method of let's hear the other side of the argument, let's consider it, let's debate it, let's form a view. As the lady who resigned as editor of one of the editors of the New York Times said, it is as if all knowledge is vested in those above, and they then trickle it down to us as the standards we must observe. And it's causing so much of the problems in the world today, and it's part of it's just not much more than bad manners, but some of it's pretty vicious. And I just don't see the need for it, but I can't get that across. So let's talk. What this is about, of course, is the Daniel Code. And those of you who have already studied the Daniel Code know that it comes from the book of Daniel, specifically chapter 12. And in that book of Daniel, it's an Old Testament book, he sets out the ratios, or he sets out a number of some figures, some numbers, which I will then go through. For you ever decide to do a Daniel Code tutorial, we start on the basis of saying these numbers are going to rule your life effectively, and you've got to have great confidence in them. And to have that level of confidence, I want something more than me simply telling you what these ratios are, or where I got them from, how they came about. I want you to discover it for yourself. In other words, for our tutorial clients, I take them the first lesson as a journey of going through the same discoveries that I made, and using your own knowledge, your own calculator. That's all you need. You could even do it with, if you're very good at mental arithmetic, you don't even need a calculator. But that's where these ratios come from. And for those of you who go through that course, we finish up with these amazing Daniel Code ratios, which control all markets in time and in price. And I know that's a funny thing to say, but time and price are the same thing on a different axis. Now, this is not WD Gann stuff where you need, 3 times 1 or 8 times 1 or any of the other lines that he used to draw. All it is that when markets have ended, either on a bar high low or on the close, at a Daniel Code number, and that's called target recognition, and it gives us recognition of price. We do the same thing on the other axis. I'm going to show you a bit more of that later on today, and that gives us target recognition of time. And what we say is that when time and price are squared, a turn is almost inevitable. Now, that expression, time and price squared, was actually invented by W.D. Gann, and I was a Gann student, a frantically obsessed student for 12 years. I know more about Gann than I believe anyone in the world. I had people in London and San Francisco for years buying these supposed Gann letters, supposed Gann charts. I was into it like you wouldn't believe, but the recognition of time and price in markets is fundamental to our trading. And when we get to these numbers that you'll see as we move along, you'll see that they have decimal points on them, most of them. We don't worry about that, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that the calendars are themselves not as accurate as you would suspect. Even with the Gregorian calendar, our modern calendar, Julius Caesar introduced the first solar calendar in 46 BC. Before that, of course, these were all lunar calendars. And the Gregorian calendar, our modern calendar, was introduced by Pope Gregory in 1582, although it was some years after that before it was adopted in England, where a significant proportion of the rulers viewed it as a Catholic plot. But both these calendars have problems, which is why you have to have a leap year. And of course, the Julian calendar was even worse. There was 13 days difference between the Julian and Gregorian calendars as time went on. Why don't we bother about the decimals in our own trading systems? And we'll come to that in a minute. But the real source of this commentary comes directly, as I said, from the book of Daniel, But I go as my witness, I go to Sir Isaac Newton, who used to be forever and ever, as far as I can remember, called the father of modern science. And I see that Wikipedia is now not using that expression anymore. They've cut it right down to the more technical achievements. But Newton's a guy who formulated the rules of gravity. He formulated the laws of motion. Every object, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. A body set in motion will continue until it meets a force to propel it the other way. And he expressed those in mathematical terms. And in Principe, that was the main Latin of the main book he wrote, he formulated the laws of motion and gravity, etc., proved Kepler's laws, lots of other stuff that I don't understand, but it's very interesting. What's not known so well is that Sir Isaac Newton was a Christian, and he was a very specific type of Christian. He's what's called an Arian. He didn't accept the Trinity, and he argued that the concept of the Trinity, which is standard for most churches in the Western world, was never mentioned in the Bible. But nonetheless, he wrote extensively about Christian matters. And his greatest work is called Observations on the Prophecy of Daniel and of the Apocalypse of St. John. And it's an extraordinary document, and I wanted you to have a chance to look at it. So if we're talking about using ratios that come from the book of Daniel, what makes us think that they have any validity? Well, the method formulated by Newton in all of his work was the basic scientific method that you observe and you measure, and that's how you get an observation and the proof of it, rather than simply a hypothesis. And one of the major statements from Newton was that to reject Daniel is to reject the Christian religion. In fact, he went on to say, Daniel is the most important book in the Bible because it foretells the coming of the Messiah. And you can read that, because if you put Isaac Newton on Daniel into Google, you'll get pages and pages and pages of books you can buy. I'm amazed that so many people have found it such a vast thing to write about. But all they'll do is, if you listen to Google, for the first 4 pages, I think it was, sell you a book. But you don't have to do that. If you look at this link at the bottom, this is provided by the Gutenberg Library, who have access to a lot of the original documents. Nothing that Newton wrote about religion, incidentally, was published during his life. It was all published after his death by some very thorough friends of his who put his works together. But at the bottom there, that link, that gives you the file. It's a PDF on observations on the prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse of St. John. And I do urge you to read it, and I want you to read it for 2 reasons. You're probably not very interested in what he's writing about, but if you can take some time to just scan through what this man has written, you will be overwhelmed by the power and the strength of his intellect. And you consider this was done hundreds of years ago, way before anyone thought of a calculator or computer. And he was doing this with quill and ink. Extraordinary. And how he did it is equally extraordinary. You have a look at it, you'll be amazed at the intellect and the breadth of that intellect. It's really amazing stuff. Newton went to Trinity College in Cambridge, and went there to get his Bachelor of Arts and then his Master of Arts. But 2 years after he got his first degree, it's an extraordinary thing to think about, but the most prestigious position was the mathematics Professor of Mathematics at Trinity College. And I'm just trying to find the right expression for you here. Here he is. He generally credited with generalized binomial theory. Newton's identities. Newton's method classified cubic plane curves, which are called polynomials of degree 3 in 2 variables. Pretty extraordinary stuff. But at a very, he was 26 when he became the professor of mathematics at Trinity College. And I'm trying to just find exactly the right expression to tell you there, so just bear with me for a moment, and I'll find it. Here we are. Return to Cambridge, did this, did that. You can read it for yourselves. But here it is, Lucasian Professor. He became the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at Trinity College, Cambridge, at the age of 26 or 27. What's extraordinary about that is that back in the day, in Newton's day, to be a professor, you had to hold holy orders. You had to have taken the various oaths that Anglican priests take. And Newton refused to do that because, as I said, he was an Arian. But this guy was so well respected that he wanted to take up this position. So he petitioned the king to be able to not have to take up holy orders. And it was granted. And from that day on, the Lucian professorship at Cambridge was exempt from those rules that applied to everyone else. Amazing stuff, really. But do take a quick look at that document that I've shown you. Let me go back. We've gone past it. I want you to just get a feel for the intellect of this man. It is quite extraordinary. It really is. It's worth looking up the PDF. And the breadth of this man's knowledge, extraordinary stuff. So this issue of is it possible to have religious beliefs and also scientific beliefs, or are they totally in contradiction to each other, reminded me of an experience some years ago in my children's lives that we were living in Taupo in New Zealand, beautiful little town right in the centre of New Zealand, right on the Great Lake Taupo there, which is an old collapsed volcanic cone, huge, beautiful freshwater lake, 1,000 feet deep, marvellous. But my children went to the Christian school at Taupo. And they were, the teachers there, at least the ones I was exposed to, were fundamentalists. They were religious fundamentalists. And one of the most delightful characters was Mr. Cowley, who became a great personal friend of ours. And I love to tell the story that at a parents' day at the school, one of the parents said to him, Mr. Cowley, you're an educated man. He had very high degrees of qualifications from British universities. A wonderful musician as well, by the way, so is his wife and children. They said, Mr. Cowley, you're an educated man. You can't possibly believe in the Bible that God created the world in 7 days, can you? And Mr. Cowley replied, no. He said, of course I don't. That's not right. God created the earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh. I mean, there was a bit of dry wit with the fundamental beliefs, but quite wonderful. But decent people can have different ideas and be relaxed about it. You don't have to have the same ideas as anyone else. And nobody has to have your ideas. And that's where the conflict arises. It's not the fact that there are different ideas. It's the insistence on those propagating those ideas that you have to absorb their ideas, or at least you will be criticized for trying to defend your own ideas. And it just seems to me that the basic concepts of understanding argument, discussion, to and fro, the search for truth by argument and debate. I don't know if that exists anymore. If it does, it's well hidden, I can tell you. So anyway, let's move on with our Daniel code. In the Daniel code lexicon, 29.6 days is time. This number and its fractals create all of the Daniel code time and price charts, which you see all the time. So Daniel also, from his numbers through the Daniel code, came up with a year of 365.37 days. Sounds pretty sensible, doesn't it? Except it's not quite accurate. The modern calendar year is 365.24. So we have 0.13 of a day, or about 3 hours variance between these two calendars. Why is that? Well, does it matter? I mean, most people have got no idea actually how long a calendar year truly is. But it raises a very interesting point. And for those of you who are so minded, you can see that the time, the calculation of the calendar year that we got from the numbers in the book of Daniel, which was written something like 2,300 years ago, do you mind? It gave us an amazingly accurate number for the calendar year. This was in a period when nobody knew anything about solar year, no idea about solar calendars. This is 300 BC, 350 BC. The first solar calendar brought in by Julius Caesar is 350 years after that. Nonetheless, in the numbers in the book of Daniel from that, we're able to see with a simple mathematical formula the projection of a modern calendar year of 365.24. So we have this variance. Now, the big question I always ask my students and to get them to think about is, how did Daniel do this? How did Daniel work out these numbers that finished up at the end, giving us the days of 29.6 days as time, and the same numbers that gave us a calendar year accurate to only 3 hours? And this was, as I say, 2,400 years ago. And the answer to that is that Daniel doesn't say that he worked it out. He doesn't say anything like that. What he says is that he had a vision, which we purport to be the Archangel Gabriel, who told him these things and told him to write them down. So if that is so, if you're inclined to the fundamentalist view, the next question is, why is it wrong? Okay, it's only an error of 3 hours a year, which is absolutely staggering. But why is it wrong at all? For those of you of a mathematical bent, you will know that the Earth is a sphere that rotates in a vacuum. And there's a formula that tells you the rate of decay of the spin of a sphere in a vacuum. You can calculate that mathematically. So if you take the inverse of that, in other words, if you start winding the clock back through the eons of ages, that error of about 3 hours gets less and less and less. And eventually it gets to 0. And that, my friends, is the moment of creation. So, having popped enough of that stuff into your head, let me tell you that a synodic month, which is the average length of a calendar month, is 29.53 days. Very close, isn't it, to the Daniel code number 29.6. And if we are not worrying too much about decimal points because of what I'm about to tell you, then we could say these dates are almost identical. So if I came to you and said, look, I found this scroll in a jar hidden in a cave in Israel, and it had some numbers on it, and from those numbers I've been able to work out what is a synodic month. That's an average month of 29.5 days. And I'm going to use that number as the basis of time, and from there I'm going to create a whole lot of new ratios. You'd say, cool, that's fantastic. Isn't that wonderful? If I said that I just picked up this number in a scientific journal and used that to base a whole trading system on, you'd say, cool, isn't that terrific? However, if you say these numbers come from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, a whole lot of people get upset. And I certainly, when we first went public with the Daniel Code all the way back in, now it's back in 2008, boy, people were frantic. I got more hate mail than you could possibly imagine. And in fact, here's Peter says, I believe in the Daniel cycles and prove it myself. I find that often the day count cycles will translate time, times, and then half in degrees. There you are. There's another way of looking at it. Very, very good. But let's have a look at this chart. So this is the S&P, which of course everyone's vitally interested in, or most people are. What I'm showing you here on the towards the left-hand side of this, as you're looking at it, is a blue line, and it's picked up a bar. This is actually a daily chart, believe it or not. I started inventing these how to get to forecast and project time on 6-day, 12-day, and 24-day charts. And it took me a number of years to finesse it to the extent of it working on daily charts. But this is a daily chart. And if you look at the bar on which the blue line is, the first blue line, not the one that has the number 62 below it, the first one on the left of your screen, that is a bar that is actually the low before the low, by which I mean the low of that bar is about 1 point higher than the next low. I put a little red line underneath it to show you that that's a low before the low. In other words, it's a higher low in an uptrend. Pretty unusual, the way this sets up in their relationship. And if we start our Daniel Code Count, this tool is available at the website if you're subscribed to the Pro package. Otherwise, you can create easily enough for yourself. If we start that from the start of that low before the low, we finish up with 70 is the first number that hits us, right on the high of October 2017. Now, the numbers we use for the time ratios in the Daniel Code are 44, 59, 62. We also use 70, which we call the heathen cycle. There's nothing heathen about it at all. It simply means it comes from a different part of the book of Daniel, and incidentally is one of these much favoured by the work that Isaac Newton's done on the book of Daniel. So I'm starting there to show you that this goes on and on and on. And there we are. We started that low before the low. It forecast the high 70 days later. You can see the blue line, it's a purple line actually with the 70 on it. Let's move on from that. So that was that one in 2017. I'm showing you all the big pull downs we've had. This is the same chart, but it's moved on a bit now, and we're talking about September 2018. And you can see where I put the rising red line on the chart. That's to show you that where this counter started from is a low before the low. And it's run out 70 days, and it's picked a low from there. So we then start our inside count. The 70 comes from a tool that you can extend. You can make that 44, 59, 62, or 70. But it gives us the first count at 70. And if we start our Daniel Code time ratios from there, look what happens. We hit the absolute high of the Emini September 21st, 2018, which started a very significant rundown. As well as that, if you look where the 62 is, it actually is at the chart high before the real impact high that came 5 or 6 days later. So we've got two on the same 2 time cycles expiring exactly. Let's bring you up to date in 2020. This is February 2020. This is the COVID, the COVID crashette. It's pretty small. It was pretty fast. It was pretty dramatic at the time, I can tell you. And we've got the same thing. If we look at the red line I put underneath the chart, you can see that I've showed you the low before the low, which has to be a higher low. This particular time was so accurate that 2 days before on the actual black bar low, it didn't give us what we were looking for. But then you had, extraordinarily, it put in 2 inside days back to back. Why? Because inside days can be treated as a null or a void. In other words, you just carry forward the last valid signal you had. And there's plenty of theory about why those happen, but that's the guts of it. So if we move forward onto the second of those inside bars, look what you get. You get the exact high bar of the February dramas. More than that, 2 bars before on the 59, you get the closing high. The blue line gives you the chart high. And lo and behold, the 70, these are all come from exactly, this is a fixed level of fixed stasis, you can't alter it. And the 70 gives you the high of the first counter trend rally. Extraordinary. Look more. So this moves up now to March the 23rd, 2020. That's the low. Have a look what I've marked for you with the red lines. There's the low before the low, with the 2 little inside bars. That's where we started the first, the count I just showed you. Move on to the next time it happens. You get another low before the low. And remember, this stuff is valid either on the bar high low or on the close. If we choose the closing low of that little multi-day pullback, look what you get. 59 gives you, bang, the low. That was the end of the COVID what am I going to call it, a crashette, because I think there's more to come. But anyway, that was the one we wanted. It happened right on a 59 cycle. If you cast your eye back to the 44 cycle, it gave you 1 bar off the chart high of the counter trend rally. Okay, let's have a look at this. We're moving on now. This is bringing you pretty much right up to date. On the run down, you can see the blue line starts from a low before the low. That is a higher low. And look what it projected. The last, the high we had very, very recently, a month ago or so. It hit that absolutely spot on. Then you move on from that low before the low. This is the next low before the low. It's an inside bar. The actual low before the low was the bar immediately before where the blue line starts. But because it's followed by an inside bar, the red bar, we can treat that as a null or a void and carry forward the last valid signal we had. So we can move that time cycle 1 day forward. Look what it gets you. It gets you the recent high we had on the 62 perfectly. That's the chart high of that move. You can see the 44 is giving you the closing low of the minor pullback. Remember, this stuff is valid at the bar high low or on the close. And look what we've got here. That's it. There it is. The same thing again, different cycles. We've got the same thing showing us. Here's more. We're now down to the last low before the low in very early April. Look what it gives you. The red line, the 44, gives you a minor high. The 59 gives you the executable turn, the bar you really wanted to be selling to get down. And the 62 gives you the low of the counter trend rally. Extraordinary, isn't it? In fact, there's more from that, because have a look here. We've now got a low before the low back in May, which is starting to project time cycles up till the present time. And as well as that, because the market's turn is going up, it now becomes important to start counting time cycles from the high before the high. Same thing. I don't know if I've got it here for you. Here it is. This is if you can see, we've now got those two areas underlined in red that give you a low before the low, or a higher low if you like. And in between them, we've got where I've started the blue line from. And that's actually a high before the high. In other words, that's a lower high. And that's a proper place to start the cycle from. Look what it gives you. Yesterday's high in the S&P. Does it mean anything? Always means something. Friday is a very bullish day seasonally for markets, S&P in particular. Janet, thank you, darling. Janet's a lovely Canadian lady who's been to more of my tutorials, I think, than anyone now that Sister Sage is no longer with us. And she said the relationship of the book of Daniel with the DC code is the best part. I'm glad you're enjoying it, love. I hope you're trading well, and I hope your ankles all recovered as well. So somewhere here I wanted to show you the consequences of all this. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to just break from this for a moment and take you to a chart because this stuff is extraordinary. So here we are. So this is the same chart, and we've started that blue line you can see we go back, we use that blue line there, that low there, that's a low before the low. This is actually, believe it or not, a low before the low because this is an up bar. Technically, it has closed greater than the open. There's lower bars either side of it. That makes that a low before the low. This is the actual chart low of that. It has a higher bar either side of it. Remember that all of the Daniel code time and price says it's valid for plus or minus one period. It's accurate to plus or minus one period. And that's because you can start the count either on the chart high or the closing high, which will give you that variation. And here we got, you've seen this, that gave us the high. Here it was June the 8th, which was great. So we've moved on, and we got to the stage that I was telling you about there, gave you a little counter trend high. That was all. Then we moved on to here. This is a low before the low, which may prove important. I'm trying to just find the important one. Here it is. This is a high before the high. In other words, this is a lower high. There's the high. The relevant high is that one. Immediately before it's a lower high. So as the market's now going up, we should be counting not only the low before the low, but also the high before the high. So that's where it is. And you can see there's a date not far away on the blue line. That's only a couple of days away. And from here, you can move on, and you'll find that here's the next low before the low. Here's a high before the high. And here's a low before the low, which gave us yesterday's high perfectly on the 44. So we've had that high on the 59 and the 62 and the 44. Just be aware it can be significant. In fact, what I've shown you, excuse me, is that it's always significant. Right, let's go back and move on. I've shown you enough about time, and I want to show you, well, this is a fairly interesting one. This happens to be wheat success today, and the market's actually pulled back a bit with an inside bar. So that's Wednesday's bar. That's the last one on the chart. But this was a success signal. We're long, still long. And anytime you can get $3,000 out of a contract that has a margin of about $1,400, it's time to say pretty good. Nice trading. And that set up itself exactly. This is a commodity. All markets are the same with the Daniel code. These tools work exactly the same on all markets. And we've started our time count here from, this is the inverse. This is a higher low, unusual. but there it is. And what's it given you? It's given you from 44, gave you the counter trend high a few months ago. 59 gave you the low to the day. The 62 gave you the counter trend high, which gave you a 2-day counter trend, and 70 gave you an inside bar, and 70 gave you a big outside bar. It's in light grey. And we've got a little pause today. But those of you who've been following success, some of those markets have been pretty subdued for a while, as is Forex. Forex has been very subdued for quite a while. And today, in fact, excuse me, we all of the trade signals for today are plus signals. The market did partial turns today. Okay, so there's success if you've been following it. If not, I suggest you should have a look at it and try a free trial by all means. Okay, so let's open this thing up again. I should have had that on the big thing. Here we are from the beginning. Here we are. You can see it again now. That's easy. That's big enough. You can see all of that. That's a lovely trade. So that was what I was talking about with success and some other markets as well. So now we're going to look at those Daniel Code ratios again, but instead of looking at price, we're looking at time. And I want to show you just how these setup bars occur. The specificity of target recognition at either the bar high low or the close is truly extraordinary, and we say that in the manual that they're accurate to plus or minus 0.1%, 0.1%, one tenth of 1%. In reality, they're accurate to a handful of ticks. So one of the criticisms of this, when you look at the charts, is that there's an awful lot of numbers. I've scrunched them down at the moment to show you the operating numbers, the bars that became setup bars. But when you look at it, you say, oh, God, there are more numbers. They go on and on and on forever. Yes, they do. But the way the market behaves is the real teller, because what your market will do, and you just see this all the time, if it's going to give you proper target recognition, it will clamp on that market as if it was stuck with glue. It will hit it with the high or the low within a handful of ticks, or at the close. Can be both. Excuse me, the hay fever started. Can be both. But have a look at these charts. Look them up yourself. Find out what these highs are and what the lines are. I've got to see if I can do a couple here while I've got you here. And they are just so incredibly accurate. This is that would jump past one. Pretty sensitive with this bit of equipment today. That's the one we're looking at. New Zealand US dollar, which is these are all exactly the same, folks, on futures or Forex or any other measurement. Here it is, New Zealand US dollar. So that setup bar, that was an outside bar. The high of that outside bar was 65.81. There's the blue line, 65.82, one tick. The next bar, the inside bar, did the same thing. Its high was 65.80 against 65.82, 2 ticks. And of course, these things are valid for 2, sometimes 3 days. The next bar, you got the turn. Let me move on, show you the next one. Just look at the accuracy of this. This is gold. It's not a particularly impressive signal, but what is impressive is you look at that, what I've got marked for you is the setup bar. The close of that bar, this was July the 8th, the close of that bar is 1820.6. There's the DC number, 1820.3. 3 ticks variance. Extraordinary stuff, isn't it? And this happens all the time. Let me show you the next example. Copper. Here's copper. What did we get there? Here it is. That high that gave us a setup bar was in fact a double setup bar. The close of that bar was, this is, we're looking at July the 13th this year. The close of that bar is 295.50. Have a look at the black line, 295.20. Then go up, that's the blue line, then go up to the high. The high of this bar, 299.30. The DC number, 298.95. They're a handful of ticks away, and that's it. It's extraordinary stuff. And I hope you're just as amazed as I am. Have a look at this. This is soybeans. And if I can stop punching this off onto the future. Here's soybeans. And that's a beautiful chart. That high, which I've marked it, this is a setup bar, the first one. That's July the 6th. That high is 912 carat 4. The DC number is 911 carat 6. That's 3 ticks variance. Have a look at the low that says this is a setup bar. The low of that bar, 871 carat 4 on July the 13th. What's the Daniel code number? 871 carat 2. 1 tick variance. And this goes on and on and on. Have a look just at today's bar. The high, 893 carat 4. There's the DC number, 894.0. 2 ticks variance. And this is what happens. It goes on all the time. So what I've tried to show you is that we can take very properly a biblical concept. We can take this from the book of Daniel, and we can say, we should be saying, how does this happen? Something to think about, because that's the eternal question. But we should be able to say that at the very least it's valid to be able to hold a biblical view and a scientific view, because all of these numbers that I've shown you, both in time and price, are all independently verifiable. You can repeat what I've done again and again and again. It meets the test of the scientific method. So it's a scientific methodology. And as well as that, we recognize that it comes straight out of the book of Daniel. So we're able to hold together this idea of a biblical view, or a religious view, if you like, and a pure scientific view. And they're not in conflict. And it should be able to hold those two ideas together. I can remember when my children first went to university, because they'd been taught at a Christian school with a very strong fundamental belief while we were in New Zealand, and thereafter we'd homeschool them with the same material coming from one of the Christian schools. They had knew and understood the creation story. That's what they were taught by their teachers. But of course, when they went to university, they had to be able to understand and to talk about Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, the evolution story. And I can remember saying to my daughter, well, it's another concept. You should know both of them. And it's quite valid to know both of them. One is obtained by faith. The other one, that's purported to be the scientific method, is still waiting to find that crossover creature. I know Attenborough claims there was one, but out of the hundreds of thousands of artifacts, no one's ever yet found the crossover creature that Darwin hypothesized about. So there we are. So it should be quite possible for us to hold those two views together. And the last word on this will go to Jesus Christ. As reported in the book of Matthew, he was asked this very question about, should your money go to pay what was tribute, effectively taxes, back in the day, or should you be giving your money to the temple or the religious authorities, or a bit of both. And Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God's." It seems to me that that's terribly clear and terribly simple. And I don't understand why the world can't accept that it's possible to hold two ideas in your head at the same time. Folks, if you've enjoyed this, you want to learn all about this stuff, you want to become a super trader, please let me know, jneedham@thedanielcode.com. It's a great time to be doing a Daniel Code tutorial now. Most of us have got some restrictions on ourselves still with COVID, which is going to get a bit worse for a lot of people. But it's a great opportunity to improve your learning, improve your knowledge. And pretty simply, if you want more money, you want to make more money, the way to do it is by trading and doing a Daniel Code tutorial. And do write to me. I'll be happy to do that for you. And the business of trading futures and forex is not to be right. The business of trading is making money, which we do all the time. If you haven't already, folks, you're most welcome to have a free trial. Go to www.thedanielcode.com. Just hit the register button. Any issues, contact Terry at support@thedanielcode.com. I know some of you have trouble registering your username at your email, the Daniel Code, because it's probably already in there once, and it doesn't want to do it again. This is my disclaimer statement, which I always want you to read. I promise you it is very, very easy to lose money, a lot of money trading futures and forex if you don't know what you're doing. So for goodness sake, take the time to learn to trade properly, learn to be a safe and efficient trader, and don't risk any real money until then. Okay, let's see, that's about finished the presentation. We've got a few questions here. Thene's with us. Thene, I'm going to call you early next week. I got your email. I'm delighted to have you here with us, my friend. And what else have we got here? Peter, it's imperative you have the right starting point. Yeah, we do. Why hasn't the DC number 89 been included in the time cycle? Akshay asks. It'll come up if you're following the right methodology, because the other numbers are fractals of that, Akshay. But you can add it on if you want to. You in fact told me that soon after we've released the Daniel Code, you were an very early member of the Daniel Code. The 89 was getting a lot of attention because it was a new number. No one had seen it until I released it on the Daniel Code in late 2008. And I can remember you telling me that you were then working for a investment bank in India, and the Bloomberg rep came and told you that they had this marvelous new number, and if you multiplied all the Fibonacci numbers together or added them together and took away the first number you thought of and rubbed the side of your ear with a hen's egg, you come up with 89. So Bloomberg were happy to adopt that. And of course, it has always been a great policy of people in all of these related businesses. It's much, I better not say it, it's entirely defamatory, but you know what I'm going to say. Okay, so what else? And there's Peter, when I started the lecture, it said first day, if you answer God, for, I can't see the rest of it, Peter, and I'm not sure why. But anyway, see if I can open that and get your question, and I don't think I can. No, if you answer God for something or other, he's going to tell me. Here it is. Okay, anyway, that's us for today, folks. Thank you for being with us. I look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions about markets, if you should send me an email and give me a bit of time to prepare the answers, I will have it for you the next time we do a webinar. But thank you for being with us, Keith Rabenek. Wonderful to see you with us, my friend. Talk soon. It was pleasure talking to you yesterday, Murph, my friend. I haven't got your video, hasn't come through yet. That reminds me. I'll have to send Terry for smarten up. All the best, folks. Enjoy your weekend. It's Friday morning down under, and it's a beautiful, beautiful sunny day, the middle of winter, and all you need is a short sleeve shirt. Pretty great, isn't it? Okay, all the best. Bye-bye.